So here's the small agenda. Most of it has already been said, but I will start with a short introduction to climate risk, explaining the definition, and then Hasse will tell more about comprehensive and rapid climate risk assessments. Emmanuel will tell a bit more about a climate risk assessment that he did in Kenya, and Ignacio will talk more about food security. And the learning goal of today is to be able to explain the basics of climate risk and also learn more about the different examples from different countries and different sectors of work in climate change. So let's start. I will start with a short introduction about climate risk. And to start off, I would like to start with a poll. The question is, or the sentence is, I know what climate risk is. So you can all, I think you see the poll on your screen, and you can say whether you know what climate risk is or if you don't know that yet. I see that a large part of you already knows what climate risk is, but that there's also part of the group who doesn't know that. So that's also completely fine, of course. And I'm really curious to learn more about your experiences and also to explain and see how we can explore this together a bit. So first, let's explore the definition of climate risk. And I will share a definition that's being widely used and also by the IPCC. The IPCC is something that was explained in the first lecture. So if you want to learn more about that, you can take a look at that. And after that, we will dive deeper into those examples through our guest speakers as well. So the definition of climate risk has mostly talking about two things. So it's really talking about the event itself, so the hazard and the impact. So if we look at the event or the probability itself, that's a chance that something harmful will happen related to climate, like more intense storm, rising sea levels, or extreme heat. And the impact really focuses on how bad the consequences would be if the event would happen. So climate risk is the chance of something bad happening because of climate, and that would be multiplied by how bad it would be if it did. So if you look at those two components, you would say that if one of the two is low and the other is high, then the risk would really be lower. For example, the impact can be really high, but the risk can be low if it's really unlikely to happen. So if the chance is really small that something happens, even though the impact is really high. The other way around, you could also say, well, an event is really likely to happen, but the impact is really small, so then the risk is quite low. And if we would break that down a bit more, we would come to this formula. Maybe I think a couple of you might already know it. It's really popular and widely adopted formula, focusing on hazard times exposure times vulnerability. So what you see here is that the impact part of this formula has been also brought further down to exposure and vulnerability. So in that case, still the hazard is the harmful climate event. So for example, an extreme storm. So it really includes how likely it is that it happens and also how big it could be. So really the event itself. And the exposure focuses on what is in the path of the hazard. So are there any people? Are there any buildings, businesses? If there's nothing there, then there's no risk, of course. And the third one, the vulnerability, focuses on how weak or strong are those exposed things. So for example, can people evacuate? Are buildings strong enough to handle a storm? If something is really vulnerable, it gets hurt more easily. So those three components are really important. And it's important to note that the climate risk is the highest, of course, when a dangerous event is really likely and strong. So a high chance and big and strong impact. If there's a lot of people or things in the area that are affected, and if they are not well protected or prepared, so if they're really vulnerable. So if all those three things are present, the risk is really high. But if you would reduce one of the three, then you can see that you would already reduce the overall risk. So of course, some things you have, you can handle, like you have nothing, you cannot do anything about an extreme storm, but still you can make yourself less vulnerable. So then in that way you can reduce the risk. So let's look at a short example to see how that could look in real life. So in a lot of places in Africa, we see that climate change is making droughts more frequent and also more intense. So let's say that before a farming region would only face a drought 1 in 10 years, but now every 2 out of 5 years, so 40% chance of drought. So there's much more drought, so the hazard has been increasing, and that's really causing a problem. But of course, the hazard is not the only thing, like we discussed before. It's also about who is exposed. So in that case, that would be the smallholder farmers, because they depend heavily on rainfall for their crops. And also a large part of their land is directly exposed to those drought effects. So that's the exposed group of people in this case. And if we look at their vulnerability, we can see that those farmers, they have high drought sensitive crops like maize or beans, and they also don't have irrigation. So they don't have crop insurance, for example, or access to drought resistant seeds. So their vulnerability is also really high, because in addition, they also have limited financial buffers. So you can see that all three components in this case, if we look at the formula, are there. So there's a big hazard, there's more drought, they're really exposed because there's a large group of smallholder farmers, for example, and they are really vulnerable. So the result is that their climate risk is quite high. But if you would want to reduce one of those, you could, for example, reduce their vulnerability, and then the risk would reduce. So that's just a short introduction to climate risk.